Welcome back to Face the Nation. We'll continue our conversation now with 2020 hopeful and former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I want to read for you the latest Battleground Tracker poll numbers we have forecasting Super Tuesday. That is those 14 states that you were just talking about trying to build support. Looking at those numbers, you are at 5% support among Hispanics, 2% support among blacks. Why do you think it's a challenge for you when it comes to winning minority support?
Well, I'm competing against some candidates who have had years or decades to demonstrate who they are and how they can win. I recognize that I am newer on the scene, and we're at a time when no one is feeling the pain of living under this administration more than Americans of color. It's one of the reasons why there's such a focus on making sure that we are the campaign that can bring an end to that and that can turn the page. But the process of proving that begins right here in Iowa. And this is our best first chance to demonstrate the kind of organizational strength that will help build credibility with folks I talk to, especially when we're in the South, who may appreciate and like our plans, but also want to know that I'll be in a position to actually deliver, to defeat Donald Trump, and to make good on those plans.
How do you stay competitive in those Super Tuesday states when you already have Mike Bloomberg on the ground and spending tremendously to build support? How do you stay competitive?
Well, there's no question that with that kind of money, you can get a level of exposure and airtime, and at the same time, one of the things that is so important, especially in this stage of the process, is that politics isn't just about what happens on television. We're having such important, moving conversations with voters who want to look you in the eye, ask you questions, understand who you are, challenge you. And I think that's the process that is ahead of us. It's one thing to arrive in the polls, arrive on the air, arrive on the scene. It's another to really go through that with voters. And even as the map grows and we're competing in more and more states, I think that will be where each of us makes our case. And I think that I've got the best case to make.
Well, you know, the Democratic National Committee changed the debate requirements. They say they tighten them, but in doing so, they have opened the door to the possibility Mike Bloomberg could be on a debate stage in the near future. Senator Elizabeth Warren has taken issue with this change, and she's pointed out that the DNC refused to change the rules earlier, quote, to ensure good, diverse candidates could remain on the debate stage. She's referring to Cory Booker and Kamala Harris. Do you think the field is less diverse because of the DNC?
Well, I share the concern about diversity, and I don't envy the DNC's job of setting rules that campaigns like mine then have to compete under. But what I know is that we're going to take those rules as they come. I'm confident of qualifying, and I think anybody who has a realistic shot at the presidency should have to stand next to their competitors, defend and make their case.
But the comment from Elizabeth Warren was fairly sharp, and she seems to be, in some ways, referring back to, some of the frustrations from 2016 when supporters of Bernie Sanders were saying, look, the system is rigged, the DNC is being unfair. Do you see that playing out again this time?
I don't see a thumb on the scale, if that's what you're talking about. And again, I recognize the DNC's got a challenging job to do. I don't get a say in those rules. We compete under those rules, have from day one when we weren't sure that I had an exploratory committee with a staff of 4, and we saw those requirements come out of the DNC and wondered if we were going to make the cut to be among those 20 candidates who made it onto that first debate stage. And ever since have made sure that we were in a position to compete. That's what we're doing right now, and I know that the DNC will continue to set the parameters. What I will say is that the less 2020 resembles 2016, the better.
Well, Senator Sanders, of course, was in that race last time. I know when we spoke, you and I, last, you talked about an essay you wrote when you were 18 years old, praising Bernie Sanders at the time for his energy, his candor, his conviction, and his ability to bring people together. What's changed now? Just you're neck and neck with him? Now you're trying to name him in your rallies and lay out why he's not the best guy.
Look, I still admire the qualities that I admired about him when I was in high school. But we're at a moment right now where our country is dangerously, frighteningly polarized and divided. And we're at a moment where we have an amazing historic majority to do big things. I mean, even more than the majority that was available to President Obama, let's say 10 years ago. Among the American people right now, there is a strong appetite to step up and, for example, solve the health care issue. It's just that people aren't crazy about the idea of being kicked off their plans. There's a huge appetite right now to do the biggest transformation we've had on college affordability since the GI Bill. It's just that some Americans aren't crazy about the idea of paying even for the tuition of the children of millionaires and billionaires.
But you praised his ability to bring people together then. You don't think he can bring people together now?
I think I'm the best candidate to bring people together now. And what we're seeing on the trail, including as I traveled to counties here in Iowa that swung in a big way from supporting President Obama to supporting President Trump, is that not only do we have Democrats dyed-in-the-wool progressives at our events, but we're seeing independents and a lot of people who self-identify as those future former Republicans I like to talk about in my speeches, coming together, not pretending we agree on absolutely everything, but ready for a change and actually as united in what it is we're for as what it is we're against.
Who's your Super Bowl pick?
Well, I'm from the Midwest, so I've got an affinity for the Chiefs.
All right. Mayor Pete Buttigieg, thanks very much. We'll be right back with the head of the Republican National Committee. Joining us now is the head of the Republican National Committee, Ronna McDaniel. Good morning. Good to have you here.
Good morning. Great to be here.
So President Trump will be the first American president to run for re-election after having been impeached. How do you turn that into an asset?
Well, we're already seeing it as an asset with our base. We've added 600,000 new small online donors since this impeachment began. We're seeing his approval ratings tick up. We're seeing independents come our way because the American people recognize this hasn't been bipartisan. This hasn't been held to the standard we've seen with past presidents. And they really view it as Democrats pushing their agenda against a president they never wanted to see elected to begin with. And they fought him every step of the way. And then they see the president signing the Phase 1 deal with China, signing USMCA. He's governing while they're continuing to resist, and I think it's working in his favor.
So you've been fundraising off of impeachment, but the RNC is also picking up the tab, isn't it true, for some of the president's legal defense, his lawyers? This is instead of creating some kind of fund like Bill Clinton did when he was impeached. Why did the RNC choose to do it this way?
Well, we do have a legal fund that is specifically for these types of things. It's not taking away from our ground game or helping with re-election and our infrastructure we're building in the states. It's specifically for legal expenses. And guess what? We're paying for it and not the taxpayers. The Democrats are doing this on the taxpayer dime. They're not getting the things done that the American people want. And we're helping to pay for some of these costs because we don't want to see our president impeached. We think he should be reelected, and that's what the majority of our supporters and investors feel at the RNC as well.
Do you know what the cost has been?
I don't know what the cost has been.
So I want to ask you about some of the polls, your home state in particular, out there in Michigan. An Epic MRA poll shows that out there, President Trump trails all 5 top Democratic candidates. Who do you think is the toughest candidate for President Trump to beat? Joe Biden says you're scared to death of him.
Well, I'll just say this. Our internal polling, where we've been in all these states, our analytics, which is more accurate, shows the president in very good shape in all of these states. I am not concerned about any of them. Nobody has become the presumptive frontrunner. You're actually seeing more people get in the race. You're seeing an energy problem for Biden. You have a huge issue with his national security stances as vice president. And then with Bernie, he's gone way too far with talking about taking away people's health care plans and taking a government control of health care. So we're going to be good against any of them because we have a record that the president can run on of 7 million new jobs, wages going up. And you see in poll after poll that you do see people feel good about the economy. They know that they're better off than they were 4 years ago, and that's what we're going to get to run on.
And you think that's your strongest argument, the economy?
It's a huge argument. I mean, people have more money. They feel better about their future. They can send their kids to college. Their kids can get jobs after college. These are things that the American voter cares about.
But President Trump has already tweeted quite a lot in the past 12 hours or so about Mike Bloomberg. He told Fox as well he would love to run against him. Michael Bloomberg's already spent $250 million on his advertising around his campaign. President Trump has spent just slightly over $50 million. How concerned are you, not just about Bloomberg himself, but what he's building in terms of an operation that he says he will hand off to any Democrat who wins the nomination?
Well, he's building an outside operation outside of the party, which is like a super PAC, essentially, once he's not a candidate. I'm not concerned about that. From a party structure, we're working with our state parties, our county parties, our district committees. We're able to coordinate directly with the candidate. It's not an outside group. And the RNC's already on the ground in 18 states. We've already trained 500,000 volunteers. We're going into 2020 with $200 million between us and the Trump campaign. So we are building the biggest infrastructure in the history of politics. I'm not concerned about what Bloomberg's putting out, and his ads, I see them all the time. I think they're terrible. Mike gets it done. What does he get done? I don't know. I don't know anything about him. We're not seeing him talking to the voters at the level that I think you need to be competitive. Yeah. And the president's not afraid of anybody. Let's be honest. He punches at everybody.
Fair, but Mike Bloomberg has tremendous spending ability here.
He does.
He's not putting limits really on what he's willing to do to defeat President Trump. He's worth $60 billion, and he's going to hand this off, even if it's not him.
Well, President Trump went up against Hillary Clinton, who had significantly more money than he did. We have seen candidate after candidate with these huge war chests come in and think they can buy an election, and the American people don't like that. And President Trump, if you look at the crowds that we're seeing, which are bigger than ever, 150,000 people signed up to come to a rally in New Jersey, in blue New Jersey. If you look at the fundraising, if you look at the enthusiasm.
Modeling a lot of what he's doing around what Trump did. It's a lot of digital.
Yeah.
It's a lot of TV.
He's modeling it, but he's not Trump. That's the big factor. Bloomberg is not Trump. He's not going to get a crowd like that. I'd like to see him do a rally and try and even get 100 people to come. I mean, this is not the movement candidate. Bloomberg, and I think he's got a real issue with the Democrat Party. I mean, listen, they just changed their debate rules and their structure for a billionaire, and they refused to do it when you had Cory Booker and Julian Castro saying, listen, we deserve more diversity on the stage representing our party. And they said, no, we're not going to change the rules for you, but this billionaire can buy his way into the debate. Bloomberg had every ability to change the way he was raising money to qualify for the debates, but they're changing the rules for the billionaire. And I think that speaks volumes about the Democrat Party.
I want to ask you, though, about President Trump's relationship with, I mean, he's reshaped the party. But there are still traditional Republicans who aren't entirely comfortable with everything he does, including your uncle, Senator Mitt Romney, who voted for witnesses. He was one of only 2 Republicans who did so in this impeachment trial. The Conservative Political Action Conference has disinvited him from an upcoming meeting, and they put up this ad online. There are TV ads against him. I mean, do you think this is proper? Political retaliation? Are you comfortable with that?
I disagree that the president's changed the Republican Party. I think the president's strengthened our party. And if you look at things that he's done...
I don't know if you saw that ad, but it was your uncle's face
I haven't seen the ad.
Disinvited, or not invited.
Well, that's the grassroots part of our party, and they're upset. They're upset when people aren't supporting the president and supporting our party, and they think if you're not supporting him, you're helping a Democrat get elected. That's a very common belief among the grassroots of our party. But I will say, this president has stood for life. He stood for rule of law judges. He stood for tax cuts. He stood for deregulation, energy independence. These are Republican ideals. And he has made the RNC significantly stronger by supporting our party. And we will be stronger after him because of the investment he's put in data and digital and the things to make us strong beyond his presidency.
Okay, I understand you don't want to comment on your comfort and your uncle and the comments about him. But we do have to leave it there. Good to have you here.
Great to be here.
In studio. We'll be back in a moment with a look at how the Democratic race is shaping up in Iowa. Welcome back. Ahead of the Iowa caucuses tomorrow, we have a new CBS News battleground tracker this morning looking at the state of the race. These numbers are based on polling data from our surveys this week, along with data on Iowa's voters and the caucus system. Former Vice President Joe Biden and Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders are tied at the top of the field with 25% each. Former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg is close behind with 21%. Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren's at 16%, and Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar has 5% support. Joining us now to make sense of these numbers is CBS News Elections and Surveys Director Anthony Salvanto. So, Anthony, what do we need to look for? What do we need to keep an eye on?
Yeah, now the fun starts. Now we get to the real
Your
stuff.
fun
right?
starts.
Well, it's going to be a late night, I think. But here's what we wanted to do. We took everything we knew about the interviews we've had with Iowa voters and caucus goers and how a caucus works and everything we know about the Democrats in Iowa. And we put it all together and we say, okay, what could unfold tomorrow night? Well, what breaks this tie for Joe Biden? This depends a lot on first knowing how a caucus works. People are going to go in with a first preference, who they plan to support. But if their candidate doesn't do well enough, doesn't make what the party sets as this 15% threshold, then they can switch. And Joe Biden is the second choice for a lot of people whose candidates very well might fall under that threshold. He could benefit from that. So if those folks move over to him, that gives him a boost. And there's another thing that could help Joe Biden too, and that is in our measures, we see that his support is pretty evenly distributed across the state. That is important because to win the caucuses, you have to win delegates throughout the state. You can't just run up the score in one or two cities, and that could help Joe Biden too.
But he's neck and neck right now with Bernie Sanders.
He is, but that would give him a boost. Now, let me tell you about how Bernie Sanders might instead get the boost. First thing is that Elizabeth Warren comes into play here because she's right near just above that key 15% threshold line that the party sets. If she doesn't make that in some of those caucuses, her supporters could switch to Bernie Sanders. He's their second choice. That could give Sanders a boost. And the other thing that's going to be interesting here is that in our modeling, Bernie Sanders gets strong support in and around the cities in Iowa. Now, we could see a turnout boost for him there, which could help him at least in the statewide overall vote, but he's going to have to spread out that support in order to get delegates everywhere.
And what about Mayor Pete Buttigieg? He's at 21%, right behind Biden and Bernie.
Yep. Also could benefit from some of the switching. Also could benefit if folks who are supporters of, let's say it's Amy Klobuchar, let's say it's some of the other candidates who may not make that 15% threshold, if they switch and some of them go to Biden, but more of them go to Pete Buttigieg, this is the same also true for Elizabeth Warren, then that gives them a boost as well. All of which is to underline that in a caucus meeting, a lot of this movement is what makes the night so exciting anyway.
And you're prepared with the coffee for a late night, you said.
Yes, I think everybody should tune in, watch CBS News and CBSN, and put another pot of coffee on and stay up with us.
All right, Anthony Salvanto, thank you. And now we turn to our political correspondent, Ed O'Keefe, who is out in Des Moines. He is fully caffeinated. And Ed, what are you seeing out there on the ground?
Margaret, it's fascinating. You know, voters are often asked or they sort of debate between their head and their heart over who exactly they should ultimately choose. And this has very much become, I think, a head contest for many Iowa Democrats. If you're somebody who supports Bernie Sanders, you're pretty much there, you're ready to go. It's everybody else that is still struggling with this, and we've been struck in recent days how they're all focused on making clear to voters that they believe they can defeat the president, whether they're doing that in their advertising or on the stump.
And that's interesting because it's not so much about be excited about me, it's about be excited about my electability in defeating the other guy. So how do they make that work?
Sure. Well, let's walk through a few examples. Let's start with the former Vice President, Joe Biden. He has completely stopped talking about his Democratic opponents. It's as if he's already running against the president. Most recently now raising questions about his fitness to serve by recalling what he said recently about injured service members in Iraq, and even now questioning the administration's response to the coronavirus not only here in the United States, but around the world. Mayor Buttigieg, who you spoke to earlier, just in the last few days suddenly is reminding his supporters that there are other candidates in this race because he hasn't talked about them at all until recently, pointing out that if you're looking for somebody who's spent 40 years in Washington, Joe Biden is your guy, but Bernie Sanders can't necessarily unite the Democratic Party, and Elizabeth Warren's Medicare for All ideas are just not practical. So interesting that he's doing that. Sanders, if he pulls it off, again, his volunteers are just so devoted to him. They've come from all over the country to be here. We've met with some of them who've come from Oregon, from Kentucky, from Queens and Brooklyn to be here. And one thing to watch on caucus night, if turnout gets close to 300,000 in this state, that would be a record high. Most of that will be because Bernie Sanders turned them out. And the other thing to watch for is a potential increase in Latino support. It's a very small percentage of this state, mostly agricultural workers, but the Sanders campaign has been after them since last spring. The first piece of mail he sent to an Iowa voter was to Latino households in this state, talking up his own immigrant roots. And in another sign of how desperate they are, Senator Warren has stopped taking selfies with her supporters and instead has turned over the responsibilities to her dog because she needs to get on to other events. The selfie lines can run for several hours at times, but they've given up because she needs to get on to other events and meet as many people as she can before she goes back to Washington.
So being a dog lover is now a requirement in some way. We've spent a lot of time talking to even the RNC chairwoman just now about Michael Bloomberg and his seeming war chest that is unending and his ability to compete. He's not there in Iowa. He's betting that doesn't matter ultimately. What is the feeling? Is that going to play out?
He is actually. Well, it's funny, just in the last few days, Margaret, we've noticed that he now is advertising in Iowa, as if to sort of remind Democrats that after this caucus, there's still a primary contest that will continue playing out. He is very much in the back of the minds, at least, of these campaigns who realize that with his unlimited war chest, he could seriously put them away on Super Tuesday, especially a challenge for these candidates now who may only have about, 7 figures in the bank, when Mike Bloomberg can write 7-figure checks, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and make some moves. And so it's something that they're very much worried about. The one who's actually calling him out most explicitly on the trail is Senator Warren, who continues to raise concerns, as you've pointed out already today, about the fact that yet another billionaire is in the race.
Only 7 figures in the bank, Ed says. So it still looks fluid, is the bottom line from what I'm hearing from you, though.
Okay. Yeah, and we've talked to people who are making their final decisions this weekend, and they'll have to do it by tomorrow night.
All right, Ed, we'll be right back with a look at that selfie-taking dog out in Iowa Ed was just telling you about. Democratic senators competing in Iowa unable to campaign this past week. There were a lot of fill-ins or surrogates out stumping for them in their absence. No surrogate caught more attention than this furry one, Bailey, Elizabeth Warren's golden retriever. Bailey worked the crowd, and when Warren did return to the trail this weekend, Bailey took her place in the selfie line. Warren has taken over 100,000 selfies with voters so far in this campaign, and she finally enlisted some help. And we'll find out tomorrow if Bailey helps his owner with Iowa voters. That's it for today. Thank you all for watching. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.